My name is Emma Parker, and I was 36 years old when my parents threw me out of their house the same night I lost my job. The call came that morning. My biggest client canceled a project worth nearly half my yearly income. It was bad news, but not the end of the world. I'd survived worse. What I wasn't prepared for was what waited at home. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. The moment I walked inside, I knew something was wrong. My mother, Diane, sat at the table. My father stood beside her. My younger sister, Chloe, was scrolling through her phone. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked about losing the contract. Instead, Chloe looked up and said, "So, who's helping me with rent now?" I stared at her. That was her first concern. Not me. Money. My father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been talking." I already knew what that meant. My mother had made a decision, and everyone else had agreed. "Chloe and Ryan need more space," she said. "We think they should have your room." For a moment, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. My father walked down the hallway and came back carrying a cardboard box. My stomach dropped. They'd planned this before I arrived. "We're not throwing you out," my mother said. Then she delivered the line that changed everything. "Your sister needs this house more than you do." The room went quiet. I looked around at my family, the people I'd helped for years, the people who called whenever they needed money, and suddenly I understood something. I wasn't family. I was a safety net, a wallet, a problem solver, nothing more. I packed a few things from my room. My father watched from the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said softly, but he didn't stop any of it. 10 minutes later, I carried the box to my car. Nobody asked me to stay. Nobody changed their mind. As I pulled out of the driveway, Chloe called after me, "Don't be mad forever." I almost laughed. Then I drove away. 3 hours later, I reached the coast. The ocean lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time all night, I smiled. Because there was one thing my family didn't know. 3 years earlier, I had quietly bought a small beach house. Nobody knew it existed. Nobody knew I'd spent years restoring it. And nobody knew my name was the only name on the deed. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Please remember we're doing what's best for the family." I read it once, then locked my phone. Because for the first time in my life, I was finally going to do what was best for me. I reached the beach house a little after midnight. The sound of waves filled the silence as I carried the box inside. This place wasn't large, just a small white house overlooking the water. But every board, every window, every repaired wall represented years of my work. No one had helped me buy it. No one had helped me restore it. It belonged to me. For the first time that day, I felt safe. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from Chloe, 1 from my father. I already knew why. The moment I answered, my mother's voice came rushing through the phone. "Emma, your sister's car payment is due next week." Not hello, not how are you, straight to money. I closed my eyes. "Good morning to you too, Mom." She ignored the comment. "We need to figure something out." We. Funny word. The night before I wasn't important enough to keep a bedroom. Now I was suddenly part of we again. "No," I said calmly. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, Chloe's bills aren't my responsibility anymore." Silence. Then came the guilt. "After everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed. For years that sentence had worked. Not anymore. "I'll talk to you later, Mom," and I hung up. An hour later, Chloe called. She sounded angry. "You can't just stop helping everyone." "Watch me." "My car could get repossessed." "Then make the payment." "It's not that simple." "It never is when someone else is paying." She hung up before I finished. I spent the rest of the day working around the house, fixing a section of railing, replacing a loose board near the porch, Simple work, honest work, the kind that clears your mind. Late that afternoon, my best friend Megan stopped by. She listened quietly while I told her everything. When I finished, she shook her head. They really threw you out? Pretty much. She looked toward the ocean. What are you going to do now? I stared at the waves for a moment, then I smiled. For the first time in years? Nothing, Megan laughed. Honestly, that might be the smartest thing you've ever done. That evening, while we sat on the porch, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Emma, he said quietly, your mother is upset. Of course she was. The person carrying everyone had finally put the load down, and suddenly everyone noticed how heavy it was. What do you need, Dad? I asked. His silence lasted several seconds. Then he said something unexpected. Did you ever feel like we took you for granted? I looked out at the dark water. The answer was obvious, but hearing him ask hurt more than I expected. Every day, I said, and neither of us spoke for a very long time. My father didn't argue. He didn't defend my mother. He just sighed, a tired, heavy sigh. I figured that was the answer, he said quietly. Then the call ended. For the next few days I focused on work. I started contacting old clients and looking for new contracts. Money would be tighter for a while, but I wasn't worried. I'd built my life once before. I could do it again. Then, 4 days after I left home, my cousin Sarah called. Emma, something weird is going on. What happened? I asked. Your mom has been opening every letter that comes to the house. I frowned. So? One of them had your name on it. That got my attention. What kind of letter? I don't know, but after she read it, she looked terrified. The call ended, but the feeling stayed with me. Something wasn't right. That evening, my mother called. For once, she skipped the guilt trip. She sounded nervous. Emma, I need your help. I leaned back in my chair. With what? It's just paperwork. The moment she said paperwork, every alarm in my head went off. What paperwork? A long pause followed. Then she changed the subject. Never mind, and hung up. The next morning, I drove to a local bank to check something that had been bothering me. Years of running a business had taught me one thing. When people get secretive about paperwork, there's usually a reason. An hour later, I walked out with a knot in my stomach. Someone had used my personal information on a financial application months earlier. The documents weren't complete enough to prove fraud. Not yet. But they were enough to make me suspicious. Very suspicious. I immediately called an attorney, and after reviewing everything, she gave me one piece of advice. Start gathering records. Why? I asked. Because if someone used your name without permission, you'll need proof. As I drove home, the pieces started fitting together. The constant requests for money, the sudden panic, the strange letter, the nervous phone calls. My family wasn't just worried about losing my support. They were hiding something with my name attached to it. And for the first time, I began wondering if throwing me out had less to do with Chloe needing a room and more to do with keeping me from discovering the truth. The next week I started digging. Bank statements, old emails, documents I'd saved over the years. At first, nothing stood out. Then I found it. A credit inquiry I didn't recognize. It had been made almost a year earlier. I never applied for anything, never signed anything, but somehow my information had been used. My attorney requested additional records. A few days later, she called. Emma, you need to see this. I drove straight to her office. The moment she slid the papers across the desk, my stomach dropped. The application contained my name, my address, my income information, everything. Everything except one thing. The signature wasn't mine. Not even close. Someone had forged it. I felt sick. Who submitted this? I asked. My attorney looked at me carefully. The loan was taken out using your parents' property as collateral. I stared at her. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then the truth hit me. My mother. It had to be. She was the only person who had access to all that information, the only person who kept copies of my records, the only person desperate enough to hide something like this. How much? I finally asked. My attorney looked down at the file. Nearly $80,000. The room went silent. $80,000. Not for medical bills, not for emergencies, not for survival. The money had gone toward Chloe and her boyfriend's failed business plans, vehicles, and personal debts. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly everything made sense. The panic, the letters, the pressure, the guilt trips. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing access to my name. And now that I knew the truth, everything was about to change. That night, I sat alone on the porch of the beach house, watching the waves roll in. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. We need to talk. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer. Instead, I looked out at the ocean and made a decision. If they wanted a conversation, they were finally going to have an honest one. The next morning, I met with my attorney again. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no instant solution. Real life doesn't work that way. The bank would have to investigate. Documents would have to be reviewed. Statements would have to be taken. But one thing was certain. I was no longer staying silent. The fraud report was filed that same week, and 3 days later, my mother showed up at the beach house, unannounced. I saw her car pull into the driveway just before sunset. For a moment, I considered not answering the door. Then I opened it. She looked tired, older than I remembered. But the moment she started talking, I realized nothing had really changed. How could you do this to us? She asked. Not, how are you? Not, I'm sorry. Straight to blame. I crossed my arms. Do what, exactly? Report the loan. I stared at her. You mean the loan someone took out using my name? Her face tightened. We were trying to help Chloe. There it is, I said quietly. What? The reason. For years, every excuse had started with Chloe. Every sacrifice, every favor, every dollar, everything. My mother looked away. You don't understand. No, Mom, I understand perfectly. For the first time, she had no answer. The silence stretched between us. Then her eyes moved past me toward the beach house, toward the porch, toward the ocean. This place is beautiful, she said softly. I almost smiled, because she still didn't know. She thought I was renting it, borrowing it, staying temporarily. She had no idea who actually owned it. And I wasn't ready to tell her yet. Not until the right moment. Not until everyone was there to hear it. A few minutes later, she left, without an apology, without taking responsibility, without admitting what she'd done. But as her car disappeared down the road, I felt strangely calm, because for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing, and very soon, my entire family was going to learn the truth about the beach house. A week later, my grandmother called. She rarely called anyone anymore, so when her name appeared on my phone, I answered immediately. Emma, she said softly. Hi, Grandma. I miss you. Just 4 simple words, but they hit harder than anything my parents had said in months. We talked for nearly an hour, about small things, the weather, her garden, old family memories. Then she mentioned something that caught my attention. Your mother is planning a big family gathering next month. I frowned. For what? My birthday. Her 79th birthday was coming up, and apparently my mother was organizing a celebration. Grandma laughed quietly. Your mother wants everything perfect. That sounded exactly like Diane Parker. She loved looking generous in front of other people. After the call ended, I didn't think much about it. Until 2 days later, an email arrived through a local event booking website connected to my beach house. I opened it and nearly dropped my coffee. The booking request was from Diane Parker, my mother. She was trying to rent the beach house for Grandma's birthday party. I read the email twice, then a third time. She had absolutely no idea the property belonged to me. The photos online showed the house after restoration, nothing like the run-down building the family remembered from years ago. My mother had found the perfect venue, and unknowingly chosen my house. I sat back in my chair and laughed, not because it was funny, because it felt impossible. After everything that had happened, the universe had handed me the perfect opportunity. My friend Megan read the email later that afternoon. "You're kidding." I wish I was. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the booking request again. A dozen different ideas crossed my mind. I could reject it. I could tell her immediately. I could expose everything right now. But none of those options felt right. Instead, a different idea formed. Slowly, carefully. The kind of idea that only works when truth is on your side. "Approve the booking," I said. Megan stared at me. "You want your family at your house?" "No," I smiled. "I want them to discover whose house it is." For several seconds, Megan said nothing. Then she started laughing. "Oh, Emma." "What?" "That might be the most patient revenge I've ever seen." Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't revenge at all. Maybe it was simply time for the truth to walk into the room. And this time, everyone would be there to hear it. Grandma's birthday arrived on a bright Saturday afternoon. I reached the beach house hours before anyone else. The tables were set, the food was ready. String lights hung across the porch overlooking the water. Everything looked perfect, exactly the way Grandma deserved. As guests started arriving, I stayed mostly out of sight. I wanted to see what happened when my family walked in, believing this place belonged to someone else. My mother arrived first. The moment she stepped onto the property, she smiled proudly. She immediately began showing everyone around, talking about how difficult it had been to find such a beautiful venue, accepting compliments, taking credit, just like I knew she would. Chloe and her boyfriend arrived shortly afterward. They were already talking about engagement plans, already discussing what kind of house they wanted someday. The irony almost made me laugh. Then Grandma arrived. The second she saw the porch, she froze. Her eyes widened. For several seconds, she didn't move. "This place," she whispered. My father looked around slowly. He seemed confused too. Grandma's eyes filled with tears. "I know this house." Nobody understood what she meant, except me. She stared at the railings, the windows, the view of the water. Every detail seemed to pull a memory from somewhere deep inside her. Then she looked at me, and somehow, before a single word was spoken, I think she knew. Not everything, but enough. My mother stepped forward. "Do you like it, Mom?" she asked proudly. "I rented it especially for you." Grandma didn't answer. She just kept staring at the house, then at me, then back at the house. A strange feeling settled over the crowd. People sensed something was happening, something important. My mother noticed it too, and for the first time that day, she looked nervous, because the truth was only a few minutes away, and once it came out, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The entire yard grew quiet. Guests stopped talking. Even the children running near the beach slowed down. Everyone could feel something was about to happen. My grandmother slowly reached for my hand. "Emma," she whispered. "You know this house, don't you?" I smiled. "Yes, Grandma." My mother's confident expression began to fade. She looked from me to Grandma and back again. "What is going on?" she asked. I took a deep breath. Then I stepped forward. "Mom, there's something you should know." The crowd turned toward me. My father stood frozen. Chloe folded her arms. I continued calmly. You didn't rent this house from a stranger. My mother's face tightened. What are you talking about? I looked around at everyone gathered there. Then I said the words I'd waited months to say. This beach house belongs to me. Complete silence. My mother blinked, once, twice, as if she hadn't heard correctly. What? I bought it 3 years ago. The guest stared. My father's mouth fell open. Chloe looked genuinely shocked. I pointed toward the house. When I wasn't helping pay everyone's bills, when I wasn't covering emergencies, when I wasn't driving back and forth every weekend, I was restoring this place. My mother shook her head. No. It's true. I pulled a folder from the table beside me. Inside were the property documents, the deed, my name printed clearly across the page. I handed them to my father. His hands trembled as he read. It's hers, he said quietly. The words hit my mother like a wave. Suddenly all the confidence disappeared, all the pride, all the attention she'd been enjoying, gone. You let me rent your house? She asked. You threw me out of yours, I answered. The crowd became even quieter. Nobody wanted to interrupt now. My mother looked around at the guests. For the first time, she realized everyone was seeing the situation exactly as it was, not the version she'd been telling, the truth. Then I turned toward my grandmother, the only person who truly mattered that day. Grandma, I said softly, I bought this place because I remembered how much you loved it. Tears filled her eyes. I handed her another folder. She opened it carefully, read the first page, then covered her mouth. What is this? She whispered. A life estate, I smiled. It means this house is your home for the rest of your life. Her hands started shaking. The guests gasped. My father sat down heavily in a nearby chair. My grandmother looked from the papers to me, then back again. You did this for me? I nodded. Every sunset from this porch belongs to you. She began crying openly, happy tears, the kind that come from a wish you stopped believing could ever come true. And standing just a few feet away, my mother finally understood something. The daughter she'd treated as a backup plan had quietly built a life without her, and she hadn't even noticed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the ocean behind us. My grandmother held the papers against her chest, like she was afraid they might disappear. My mother stood frozen. For the first time in my life, she had no argument, no guilt trip, no speech, nothing. Because facts are difficult to fight when everyone is watching. Finally, Chloe broke the silence. Emma, I didn't know. I looked at her. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she wasn't. At that point, it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. You never asked, I said. That was the real problem. Nobody had ever asked. Not about my business, not about my life, not about my dreams, only about what I could give. My father slowly walked over. His eyes were wet. I should have stopped it, he said quietly. The room, the box, all of it. I nodded. Neither of us could change the past, but at least he was finally telling the truth. My grandmother squeezed my hand. Come sit with me. So I did. The party slowly started moving again. People drifted toward the food. Conversations returned. But something had changed. The old story was gone. The one where Emma was just the dependable daughter. The one who always sacrificed. The one who always paid. That version of me stayed behind in my childhood bedroom, the night they packed my things into a cardboard box. As the sun started setting, everyone gathered on the porch. My grandmother sat in her favorite chair facing the water, a chair I had bought specifically for her. She smiled the entire evening, and seeing that smile made every difficult year worth it. My parents left shortly after dark. My mother stopped near the driveway. For a moment, It looked like she wanted to say something, maybe apologize, maybe explain. Instead, she simply got into the car and drove away. Some people spend so long avoiding responsibility that they no longer know how to face it. That was her journey now, not mine. Months later, the fraud investigation was completed. The forged documents were confirmed. The debt was removed from my name. The consequences belonged to the people who created them. My business recovered too. New contracts came in, new opportunities appeared. Life moved forward. And every weekend, I drove to the beach house. Not because someone needed money, not because someone expected something, because someone was happy to see me. My grandmother spent 2 wonderful years on that porch, watching sunsets, reading books, telling stories, exactly the way she always wanted. The last conversation we ever had was sitting side by side overlooking the water. She looked at the ocean and smiled. "You know what makes me happiest?" "What?" I asked. She squeezed my hand. "You finally stopped carrying everyone else's roof." I laughed. Then I looked at the house, at the porch, at the waves rolling toward shore, and I realized she was right. For most of my life, I had been the wall everyone leaned on. But walls don't get thanked, they just get used. The day my parents threw me out, I thought I had lost a home. What I actually lost was an obligation that never belonged to me, and in its place I found something much better: peace. Because family isn't the people who need you the most, it's the people who value you even when they don't need anything at all. And that made all the difference.